Hello everybody, thank you for joining today. I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Shelley Hughes and I am here today to talk with you all about the Pediatric Evaluation of Disability Inventory, or the PEDI-CAT, or the PEDI-CAT as it's sometimes called. I am a Senior Product Manager with Pearson. I've been here for many years, so I manage our occupational therapy and developmental assessments. And I'm an occupational therapist by background, having worked in both the United States and in the UK. So I'm a registered occupational therapist in the UK, and I'm presenting from home, like many of us are probably in our home environments today. So here we go. So I'm going to skip through these slides. I've got just a couple of housekeeping notices first before we kick off. If you have any questions during the presentation, please pop those into the chat. If you have any technical issues or anything like that, again, pop them into the chat. You should be able to see a Q&A icon on your screen. I have two colleagues on here today assisting, Robert and Tamara, who will be able to help you with any technical issues that you might have, we hope, as long as it's within our control. And any questions you have about the assessment, anything like that, then please pop them in. Some we'll probably hold till the end, but we will see them. And I hope that we'll be able to get through everybody's questions today, if there are quite a few. And if we don't, then we'll endeavour to get back to you with a response after today's event. And I think that's it. Oh, no, two other things. This will be recorded. We're recording it and it will be available at a later date on our website. So if you have colleagues who have missed it and they want to know more about it, then please look out for that being posted on our website. And there will be a PDF available of the slide deck after this session as well, and that should be available on the website. Not immediately. It takes a little while to get these things up and running, but it will be there. And on that note, I'm going to skip through my slides. I think I'm on the screen at the moment. I'll probably disappear at some point as we switch to just full screen mode with my slide deck. So there's no technical issues if that happens. It's just to kind of save bandwidth as well. So, and I'm also going to be looking away from the screen at some point while I look at my slides, because I'm working on a dual screen setup. So, so let's skip through these. So let's check this is working. Yeah. So today's session, I'm going to give you an overview of the I tend to say PEDI-CAT because I work with the US quite a lot, and in the US it's called PEDI-CAT. In the UK we tend to call it PEDI-CAT, and until for years I called the old PEDI, or the PEDI, I used to call it the PEDI, but I've kind of got into the habit of calling it PEDI, so I'll probably slip between both phrases. So anyway, we'll firstly I'll be giving you an overview of the PEDI-CAT, then an overview of QGlobal, which is the platform that we have PEDI-CAT hosted within. I'll talk a little bit about availability and pricing and about report options, and then we'll talk about that there has been a version of the PEDI-CAT out and available on the market up until now as a desktop application, and I'm aware that there may well be some people on here today that have used that old version. So I'll talk a little bit about converting from the old version to our new QGlobal version. Let's give you an overview. What is the PEDI-CAT? So it's published on QGlobal, on Pearson's QGlobal platform in April 2020. And it's basically a caregiver report. It's a series of questions that you ask a caregiver about an individual that you are looking for more information on, I guess. It has diverse coverage, and I'll have another slide that talks a little bit about the diverse coverage of the assessment. And it's computer adaptive. It's a really unique assessment, and by computer adaptive we mean that the responses change, the items change depending on the response of the individual. So it's always adapting to capture the optimum amount of information about that individual. It has automated scoring and report generation. And there's no special environment or equipment required to administer the assessment other than an internet-enabled device, whether that be a computer, an iPad, a smartphone, whatever. That's the equipment that's needed to actually be able to administer the assessment. There's no manipulatives, there's no special stimulus manuals and procedures to follow other than respond to the questions or the items. There's no training required. We do sell assessments which are dependent on people's qualifications. So we have different qualification levels for our assessments, and we do sell according to those qualifications. So this one is, I think it's a CL2 qualification, which means that most of our occupational therapists, physical therapists, physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, psychologists, they can access the assessment without any additional requirements. And the manual is included. So once you get access to the assessment, the manual is included, and you get access to the manual within QGlobal as well. There are various translations available for this assessment as well. And I think this is the next slide is just going to talk about the translations that are available. In fact, sorry, this is not moving along. There we go. There's the translations. So we have US English, US Spanish, French Canadian, English Commonwealth, and I'm highlighting this because we've termed this Commonwealth because it's English that was devised to capture the needs of those in Australia, those in Canada, and those in the United Kingdom. So in order to capture all those needs, we use the term Commonwealth to basically capture English in the United Kingdom as well. We tried to think of a better term, but that seems to be the term that captured it all. There's also Dutch, there's German, Swedish, Norwegian and Danish, Italian and Brazilian Portuguese. Now, most of these languages will be available through our different countries. We have offices in many different countries throughout the world, so most of these will be available in those respective offices. The only anomaly with that is that the Italian will be available through our UK office because we don't have an office in Italy, and the Brazilian Portuguese will be available through our US office because although we have an office in Brazil, they don't have QGlobal. So in order to enable people to access it through the QGlobal platform, we're making it available through those different offices. What I should say is when you purchase PEDI-CAT, you will get access to all the different language options. So even if you're in the United Kingdom and you are assessing somebody that's perhaps from Germany, you can actually administer them the German questionnaire and still interpret it in English. And you can still generate a report in English. And that's one of the real beauties of it is this variation in languages, availability in languages. I should say all those languages aren't yet available. The ones that are available are, let me get my little pointer. The ones that are available immediately are the English US, Spanish US and English Commonwealth. We're rolling out the other languages over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So by midsummer, they will all be available. So in terms of intended populations, I use this image purposely because I think it really captures what the PEDI-CAT is about. It is an assessment that captures the needs of such a diverse population, whether it be individuals with physical needs in wheelchairs using walking devices, whether it be those with cognitive and behavioural needs who have quite high levels of support requirements in the home environment. It really does capture all those needs, and it's useful from birth up to 20 years and 11 months. You can use it out of age range with the scaled score, which is what we call a criterion reference score. So some people do use it out of age range to continue with progress monitoring and things. But for the standardized data, the normative data, then it's up to 20 years and 11 months. So there are various versions of the PEDI-CAT. The main ones are what we call a content balanced and the PEDI-CAT. And the PEDI-CAT, I think, is the best name of a test I've ever come across. I love it. And what does that mean? Well, the content balanced is like, think of it as a full version of an assessment. It's balanced for content, and it's going to have more questions. And this will become a little bit more apparent as I talk through the domains. The difference between the content balanced and the PEDI-CAT is the PEDI-CAT is is a briefer assessment. It has about half the number of items. And I'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through. We also have an ASD scale, or an Autism Spectrum Disorder scale. And again, this is available for content balanced and the briefer PEDI-CAT version. The ASD scale is not intended as a diagnostic tool. It's not intended for diagnosing ASD. It's intended for helping understand the needs of this particular population. So the items are adapted to individuals who either have a diagnosis of ASD or are suspected of having a diagnosis of ASD. So it will adjust the items to more easily reflect or more accurately reflect their needs. And then there's the domains that it covers are daily activities, mobility, and mobility has a subdomain of a wheelchair subdomain. Obviously, this is not implemented if they're not a wheelchair user. These items do adapt to the needs of the individual, but it does have that subdomain if it's appropriate. It has social cognition and responsibility. And all these 4 domains are available as a content balanced or as the SPEDI, the briefer version. And the ASD scale adjusts items for daily activities, social cognition and responsibility. The mobility items don't change at all for the ASD scale. And I know this probably sounds a little confusing, and it will, as I give you examples, you'll be able to sort of picture how it works a little bit. But the main thing is to think that there's these 4 domains, that you can have a full version, a briefer version, or you can have an ASD version. And as I've said, you're not asked all the particular questions every time you administer the assessment. There's basically an item bank of questions, and there's an item bank of 276 items for the non-ASD version, and there are 300 items for the ASD version, because there are some additional items in for that population. But you're only ever going to be asked a maximum of about 120 items, because the content balanced version is the more comprehensive version, and that will ask approximately 30 questions per domain. So if there are 4 domains, 30 times 4 is 120 items. So you're never going to be asked more than about 120 items. If they do the PEDI-CAT version, you get asked about 10 to 15 questions per domain. So for that, you're never going to be asked more than about 60 items. And the other thing to note is that this is really flexible. You don't have to do all these domains. So if you're administering an individual with perhaps on the autistic spectrum and mobility isn't an issue, you can omit the mobility domains. Likewise, if you are assessing a child who's a wheelchair user and social cognition is not something that you want to look at, then you could omit the social cognition. You can do as many or as few of these as you want, because each scale is scored independently. Okay, so some of the applications. Now we've sort of talked a little bit about the structure of the assessments. One of the key applications is for identifying functional delay, and it really is a functional assessment. It really captures those functional skills, functional needs. So it really does help identify where there may be needs and delays or support requirements in functional skills. It's useful for progress monitoring, and that can be done in groups or individually. And for reassessment, there's no minimum timescale for re-administering the PEDI-CAT assessment. It can be administered as frequently as you require. And that's the beauty of certainly with progress monitoring and follow-up, perhaps even going from acute care setting to back into a community care setting. You can use it for discharge planning and things like that. And it's really useful for goal setting. And as I talk through the report options, you'll be able to see some of the how you can capture information from the assessment for goal setting and establishing needs. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the content examples. I want to give you, I think it really helps to visualize and see the items. So on the screen here, you've got an item that is from one of the daily activities questions. And you'll see with the daily activities and mobility, the items are presented with an image as well, just to help caregivers understand what's being requested. So this one is pours liquid from a large carton into a glass. And you've got a 5-point scale from unable through to I don't know. So you can basically go through those, and the caregiver reads the question and then responds to that particular item. So let's go on to the next one. Sorry, it froze a second there. And then, oh, it's frozen again. There we go. Okay. Another daily activities item, and this one is rubs hands together to clean, so to wash their hands. Quite an appropriate item at the moment, I think. And another one, I just wanted to show you one of the more advanced items that you might get, or one of the mature items, let's say. And this one is shaving face using electric or safety razor. So I wanted to show you sort of the breadth of coverage that some of the daily activities items have within them. And in terms of mobility, this is an example of a mobility item. And again, this is quite a sort of a younger, developmental stage. So when lying on belly, pushes up from hands, and again it's this 5-point scale. And what I should point out, you'll notice on these there's a response which says I don't know, and it really doesn't matter how many I don't know responses you have. If you have an I don't know response, it will just replace it with another item that is appropriate. So so it does totally account for situations where the caregiver might not be able to respond. Another example of a mobility item, this is walks fast enough to cross a 2-lane street safely. And you'll notice here it says, please do not consider the use of walking aids, walker crutches or canes. Because there are items specific to that scenario, if they're using walking aids, then there are items that will ask about the use of walking aids. So this one again, it's that same 5-point scale, whether or not they can manage that task. And I wanted to again show you an item that's a little bit more advanced again, and I guess this has some complementary features with a lot of our other assessments that might capture motor skills. This is capturing those practical everyday mobility and motor skills that an individual participates in their everyday life. So this one is climbing up a ladder, up the side of a ladder, up the ladder of a slide, and again it's that same 5-point scale. And this is an example of an item with a walking aid. So this one, it walks with a walking aid, for example, walker, crutches or canes from room to room and home, and no stairs. So again, it's got the pictures there of the different walking mobility devices. Here you'll see an example of a wheelchair item. So this one is going up and down curbs with a manual wheelchair. And here, another wheelchair item. This is transfers, moving from a manual wheelchair to an adult-sized chair. And then if I go on to the social cognitive, these ones haven't got images with them. It's just the daily activities and the mobility. But you'll see here, this one is greets new people appropriately when introduced. It's again that same 5-point scale. Provides own address and telephone number when asked. And here's an example of an item that's adapted for individuals with ASD. Ignore the fact that it says ASD there. This is taken from our development version. So in the final version, it doesn't say that on the screen for caregivers. But this is, if I just go back to the previous item, you'll see this one is provides own address and telephone number when asked. For those on the autistic spectrum, that's adapted, and it adds a prompt there saying that when responding to these items, consider your child's performance using their primary mode of communication, whether that's an augmentative communication device, sign language, or picture exchange systems, etc. So it just provides more prompts in this particular item, but other items might be adapted even in other ways, and there are some additional items, like I said, for this particular group. Responsibility, this scale, this is one of the really nice scales that I really appreciate for the PEDI-CAT or the PEDI-CAT. And this scale really captures the support requirements that we put in place around an individual. And when we have individuals or families are looking after individuals with additional needs, there's a lot of support, a lot of scaffolding that they provide around that individual in the home environment. And there are very few assessments or ways of capturing that information. You know, what is the burden on the caregiver to be able to support this individual in their everyday lives? And this scale picks up those that caregiver responsibility or caregiver burden, as well as how much responsibility the individual is taking for themselves. And you can monitor and capture that information as that individual perhaps is gaining more independence. You can use it to help determine, how much support the caregiver is putting in, and help with transition planning as well. What are the support requirements of this young person as they transition perhaps into adult services, or they move from one education setting to another, or one care setting to another. So this one responsibility is maintaining cleanliness and upkeep of living space, including cleaning spills, wiping food, crumbs, etc. I won't read all that out. But you'll notice the scale on this one has changed. So this time we have it for ranging from the adult or caregiver has full responsibility and the child not taking any responsibility, to the child taking full responsibility without any direction, supervision or guidance from an adult caregiver. And I think this is a really nice way of capturing those support needs of an individual. And again, just to give you, just a second, I don't think I've flipped, no, okay. I'll give you an example of an item, an ASD item for responsibility. Again, ignore the fact that it says ASD there, that's not on the final version. But this one, washing hands after using the bathroom. Again, an appropriate item for the current climate. And you'll notice here it says, and there is a typo here, there isn't in the final one, but drying hands if there's supposed to be a full stop and a space there. But drying hands, and then it should say if your child uses hand sanitizer as an alternative to washing hands with soap and water. So it's capturing the fact that soap and water isn't always used, isn't always needed, and there are situations where hand sanitizer might be the most appropriate medium for washing hands. And just to give you an idea of how it looks on the smartphone, this image was captured from my own smartphone, and then I've just put a border around it and popped it on here. But you can see how it looks on the screen. It's quite clear for caregivers to respond to while using a smartphone, and it's very simple just to swipe through the screens, respond to the items and swipe through the screens. So that's a summary of kind of a quick overview or an idea of how the items might look. Let's talk a little bit about the psychometrics and how the test was developed. So the test is a US sample, it's developed in the United States, and it has a large sample, 2,205 individuals, which is a very large sample. On the previous version, you've heard me mention that there was a previous version, a desktop version, which some of you may have used. There were 21 age groups. So they were 1 year age groups. So it was birth to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and so forth. Now we have 59 age groups. And what we've done with the QGlobal version is narrowed those age bands at the younger age level. So it's more sensitive to the developmental changes of that younger age group. So 0 to 11 months, there's 1 month intervals for the standardized scores. 1 to 1 year 11 month 2 month intervals, 2 to 5 11 3 months, 6 to 10 11 4 months, and then it retains the 1 year age bands from 11 to 20 years. So we're just acknowledging that the developmental trajectory, if I could say that, for younger children is more rapid, and the norms reflect that. And there's a clinical validation of 703 children with disabilities, illustrating that this assessment does identify and pick up the needs, the unique needs of those particular groups. And there's an awful lot of research out there. I mean, if you do a literature search, you'll find tons and tons of research on the PEDI-CAT and with different groups. And there's information in the manual as well, which talks about the main groups in the initial development. And there's also been additional development for the ASD scale. So they've done additional validation for groups of individuals on the autistic spectrum. And as I've said, it's computer adaptive. And if I just go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what is computer adaptive testing? Well, it's basically tailored testing. As I said before, the items are adjusted depending on the response from one item to another. So if you respond to an item and say that's really easy for this individual, the next item will be slightly harder. And if an item's too hard, the next item will be something that's slightly easier. And it's developed on something called item response theory, which is one of the methods that we use for developing assessments. I won't go into details about item response theory, that's another session, but you're welcome to go and look it up. It's quite a fascinating sort of area or to me it's quite fascinating, perhaps not to everybody. As I said, it basically adapts to the examinee's ability level. It does require large item pools, and that's why we have, if you recall the earlier slide where I talk about the item bank, that's why we have a large number of items, so it can select the optimum items for that individual. And the other nice thing is that you are not asking the caregiver or the individual to respond to inappropriate items. It's identifying whether an item is appropriate or inappropriate or not, and you basically, they're responding to key items for their needs. And it creates a very brief, as I've said, the 15 item, the PEDI-CAT or the content balance, it creates a brief but very precise assessment. And that's one of the beauties as well. The average administration time of the PEDI-CAT is about 10 to 15 minutes. So it is really, really brief, but you're getting very, very accurate information in that brief assessment. And because of the nature and the way it's developed, you do actually get equal or at times higher reliabilities than perhaps some of the more in-depth assessments, because those items are targeted at that individual's needs. So I've talked about the assessment, so I'm going to talk a little bit about QGlobal now and what it is and how PEDI-CAT is on QGlobal. So QGlobal, for those of you not familiar with it, it's Pearson's web-based platform for test administration, scoring, reporting. It's accessible, from any web-enabled device 24/7. And it generally includes our questionnaires, rating scale type of assessment. So something like the Sensory Profile or Vineland or some of our behavioural assessments will be hosted on QGlobal. The unique thing about PEDI-CAT is it's our first computer adaptive assessment that's gone onto QGlobal. So it's quite exciting in that it's offering that computer adaptive functionality within QGlobal. And depending on the type of assessment, there are 3 different ways to administer assessments in QGlobal. We have manual entry. So manual entry is where you maybe have done an assessment. So you could do something like the Bruninx or the BOT and you can take the scores on that assessment and you can enter the scores into QGlobal from a paper form and generate a report. That's one way of using QGlobal. Or we have on-screen administration, where you can set it up on your screen while you're with that caregiver and give them the device or access to the device to respond to the items whilst you're there. Or we have remote on-screen administration. This is where you send a link via email to a caregiver and they respond to the questions remotely in their own time, their home environment, and those responses, once they've completed it, it automatically generates a report and it's there in the system ready for you to view. So PEDI-CAT or PEDI-CAT will only have these latter 2 options, what we call OSA and ROSA. It will not have manual entry because there's no paper version available for it. It is only available on QGlobal. So it's only available for on-screen administration where you're with the individual in person, or for remote on-screen administration. So as I said, QGlobal, it gives you 24/7 access. All the reports, your reports are stored in one place. It's very, very simple. You have access to the manual in the resource library, and the manual for the PEDI-CAT is free. It's compliant with all data requirements. It's used a lot in health and education settings throughout the world, and certainly in the UK, in the NHS and the education system, it's very widely used. One of the beauties is you only pay for what you use. So you purchase reports in advance and usages, but you are until you generate a report, that usage isn't consumed. So let's say, for example, you sent out a questionnaire to a caregiver to respond to, and they never responded to it. Now, if that was a paper questionnaire, you've paid the cost of that questionnaire and you've lost it because it's disappeared in the ether, in the mail, or whatever. But if they don't use it on QGlobal, you haven't paid anything. It just disappears. It goes after 30 days, it disappears, and in fact you can actually cancel the usage sooner than 30 days. But you haven't lost anything. You've not paid for anything. Even though you pay for the reports in advance, you only pay for what you use, so you can buy as little as one report at a time. And it allows for the management of organisational accounts. So in large organisations, it's a really good way of structuring accounts, so you can allocate usages within your organisation, so usages are used appropriately by the right people. So we've got an organisational account facility, which is really popular. And it's time saving. Obviously, if you can send a questionnaire out to a caregiver beforehand, they respond to it in their own time. You don't have to sit with them to respond to it, and it comes back to you ready scored. So certainly the PEDI-CAT is used a lot for pre-assessment as a pre-assessment questionnaire, where it's sent out to gather information before you perhaps even see that individual before an assessment session. Or it can be just sent out, you know, a caregiver can be completing it while you're perhaps seeing a child face to face in person. So there's lots of different ways, but certainly it's time saving, and there's no manual scoring. All the scoring is done automatically for you. So let's show you a little bit. This is a few screen grabs I have here just to show you how QGlobal looks and feels. So you'll see here, this is just a screenshot of having logged in, and these might be some examinees, students or clients that you've set up already in the system. One of the first things to point out is the help section here. This is a really good resource for just training resources and materials if you're new to QGlobal. And it has a lot of things, if you'll see on this slide, a lot of tools around how to create examinees, how to manage assessments, how to do, you know, anything you need to be able to do within QGlobal. It's there as a useful resource. We have something called the resource library, and as I've mentioned a few times, the PEDI-CAT manual is available free of charge in the resource library, and as you'll see here, there's a list of assessments in QGlobal. And here's the manual, so you just access it through this link here, and you just view the manual as a PDF within the resource library. In terms of assigning a new assessment, so this just gives you an idea of how easy it is to assign an assessment. So maybe you've got a record, an individual that's already set up in here. You've got some basic demographics like age, date of birth, gender, things like that, and then you can select the option to assign new assessments. And you'll see here I have PEDI-CAT saved as one of my favourites. So here's a list of all our assessments that are available. These are my favourites that I use. And you'll notice here I'm actually logged into the US platform, so there's US spellings, but there is a UK platform as well. And you'll see here PEDI-CAT is here. So I select a PEDI-CAT and I will assign that assessment for an individual to complete. When I assign that assessment, you then have an option of doing it in person, which is your on-screen administration, or remote on-screen administration, so sending a link via email. So depending on which one of these I choose, I then select create administration here. But one of the things I need, actually, I've got another thing I'm going to come back to in a second, but when you're creating, you can do things like set a time limit on the caregiver completion, so whether it's 30 days, it should be noted, one of the questions that always comes up, what if a connection drops? So let's say you're administering an assessment there and the connection drops. Well, it saves all the time as you're administering it, so you will be able to go back into the assessment where it dropped off. All our system requirements are on our website, but it meets all current requirements for platforms and security and confidentiality and things like that. I mean, it is our big platform that's constantly updated as needed with things like with requirements like that. The remote questionnaires, as I've said, if you're going to email out a link, they can be completed on any internet-enabled device, whether that's 4G or Wi-Fi enabled or 5G even. And then it has something called a test screen lock. So if I go back to this previous screen a second. So if we do this in person option here and we select that option and we create an administration, then you have an option of a test screen lock, and that basically locks your computer screen, your device, so if they're responding on your device, they can't access anything else on your device. It locks everything else on your device. And then if as you're going on here to launch an assessment, the other things to point out, here's your checkbox if you want to activate the lock screen, as I've just mentioned, locking down your device from anything else. And then these are your options. So as I've said before, you can select any domains that you want to administer. So whether you want to administer content balance for all 4 domains, or maybe, you know, I've got an individual, I'm more concerned about the mobility and daily activities and responsibility. I'm not so concerned about social cognitive, so I'll just do the briefer version of social cognitive, but I'll do the full version of everything else. So that might be something you choose to do, but it's totally flexible in what you choose to assess and how you choose to set up that assessment. Then when you're selecting demographics, so when you're setting it up, you have the option of choosing the language here. So here's, I've just taken a little screenshot here just to show you the different language options. At the moment it's just showing these 3. As we add more languages, they will be listed and as available. And then we select who's completing the assessment, what devices they have, whether they use a wheelchair, and whether the individual has been diagnosed with autism or not. And this is the item that adjusts or that provides the autism scale. So if this item's endorsed, then you'll get the autism specific series of questions. I should note the Commonwealth English still retains the dollar symbol, and that might come up for the UK population. It contains a dollar symbol because it's applicable across Canada and Australia as well, and where they use dollars. So we've retained the dollar symbol in there, but it can be just assume pounds in that scenario. So it might, one of the questions, for example, might be, can count money or handle money up to $20? Well, it would be £20. It's the same scenario. Then when you start the assessment, this is the screen you'll see to begin it. I'll just flick through this one. Once you begin it, the caregiver is asked the same demographic questions again. And this is because there are perhaps scenarios where this is the first assessment they've received and you don't know all this information. You don't know whether or not you may well know they use a wheelchair, but you may not know whether or not they use a device, whether their preferred device is a walker, crutches or cane, for example. Or you might not know if they've had a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So it allows, it's kind of a checkpoint, and it allows the caregiver to change some of these if necessary, if they're not set up right. So when you first open it up, you'll get instructions like this on the screen, daily activities, giving instructions about how to rate the individual's performance. And then, as I've shown you before, this is an example of another item. This is the first item you actually always see, which is pulls open a sealed bag of snack food. And this is the item that then is, I guess, the first indicator. If this one is too hard, then next time you'll get an easier item, and if this one's too easy, next time you'll get a harder item. So let's talk a little bit about report generation and options. Once the assessment is completed and it's been administered, so let's say a caregiver's done this and you've sent it off and they fill it out in the evening, you come to your desk the next day and you'll get a notification to say that it's been completed and it's ready for reporting. You've still not been charged for a usage of this assessment. You've still not been one of your credits hasn't been used at this point, even though they've completed it. Your credit hasn't been used until you go in to generate a report. So this again is a screen grab from QGlobal, but we can go in to generate a report, and we can generate a report for one examinee and select the examinee and then go in and find the assessment, and it will say that the assessment is ready for reporting in the system as well. So you'll see that here. So this one, we've taken the individual, they've had the assessment, this was the administration date, and it was done on screen and it's ready for reporting. So we select that and we configure report. When we go into configure report, we have options of report options, whether we want to include something called item maps, which I'll talk about, whether we want to include items administered by domain, which is a more detailed breakdown of the items that are administered, whether we even want to use name, because there are some situations you might not want to use the examinee name. And then you can actually select the language of reporting. So let's say they've administered it in German, you can still report in English, so you can select that language there. And then you go in and you create a report. And report type it's as a PDF. All reports are exported as a PDF. So what scores, what information do you get on a report? You get T-scores and percentiles, they're your normative scores. You get scaled scores, so these aren't age related, and these are a really good way of monitoring change over time, the scaled scores, because even as a child, perhaps a child with additional needs, as they progress, the gap often gets wider, their T-scores and percentiles fall in comparison to their peers. But using a scaled score, you can still chart progress, and that generally improves and changes over time because an individual is gaining skills or gaining more independence. So it's a really nice way of monitoring change and seeing positive change over a period of time. And as I've said, it can be used out of age because it's not age related. This particular score can be used beyond 20 years, 11 months if you're perhaps working with an individual who's transitioning into adulthood. And then we have something called a fit score, and this provides information about whether the responses, it's kind of a goodness of fit. So are responses close to what you would expect, or is there an unusual pattern of responses? And the wider the fit score, the more unusual the pattern of responses is, and that's the easiest way to explain it. There's more information in the manual, but that's a kind of a easy understanding of the fit score. So you've got, if it's a wider fit score, there's more variability in that individual's skill set or individual's needs, let's say. And then we have something called item maps, and I'll show you an example of an item map and how to use that. So here's I guess the front page of a report. When you generate a report, as I've said, there is a name, but you can choose to omit the name if you want. If they have an ID, you can choose name or ID, and then date of birth and gender. And this is the first part of the report. This is a summary of scores, and this is the normative scores here. So you'll see, well, let's start here, scaled score. So this is the one that's not age related. So this is a scaled score here, and then the standard error around that scaled score. Then we have our normative scores. So this one's T-scores and percentiles. And then your fit score, as I've said, the wider the fit score, the more variable the profile is. And you can see here the number of items administered. So this was a content balanced, and you'll see at the end here it says 2. And if we look down here, the number 2 refers to content balanced, which version were they administered, and it was content balanced. So you can see here for the first one there were 32 items because 2 of those responses were I don't know. So they actually got 32 items to accommodate for those 2 I don't know responses. And then the others were all 30. Device, there's no wheelchair on this one, and no devices and no wheelchairs. So they're all a 0 on that. And then we can have this report option, items administered by domain. So this is just a printout of everything that was administered in the individual's response. If you want to go through and eyeball everything that they responded, then you can have that in it, and it prints that out or provides that in the report. Then an item map. So an item map takes all the items in the PEDI-CAT, and you can see these with the little red square. These are the endorsed items. These are the items that the individual responded to. And this is the scaled score. So this is that criterion reference score. And you can see here their scaled score is 61. So the red line is 61 here, and the standard error is 67. So, sorry, 0.67. So 0.67 either side gives you the range that you'd expect typically expect their skill set or their performance to be. And you can use this to identify outlying responses and see where there might be some kind of unusual patterns, perhaps using it for identifying strengths. So items further to the right are easier and items further to the left are harder. So you can see here there's perhaps a little bit of difficulty around transitions from one activity to an activity to another, or is upset when upset they respond appropriately. They find that quite challenging, but they're good at keeping unsafe objects out of mouth. So so it's helping you identify maybe some of the strengths and some of the areas of need. So it's a really nice way of just visually seeing the profile of an individual. So in terms of availability and pricing, and I think I'm getting towards the end now, so if there are questions that people, I think I've probably got about 3 or 4 slides left, so probably another 3 or 4 minutes, and then I'll be ready to take any questions. So through the UK, the reports are £2 per administration or report, and that, as I've said, you don't use, you purchase them in advance, but you don't use it until you actually generate the report. And that includes access to the manual. There's no additional manual, so literally there are no big outlay of costs for kits and materials. You just pay for what you use. And there's no expiration on usages either within QGlobal. I mean, there is a caveat: if you don't access QGlobal for 5 or 6 years, then I think it does kind of lock you out of the system. But generally, there's no expiration on usages. So if you were to buy 100 usages this year, they could last you for the next 2 years, let's say, and there'd be no expiration. As I've said, a usage is only consumed on report generation, and it includes access to all languages when available, because all languages are not yet available. So if you are using or have used the old version, and I don't think there are many people in the UK have used the old version. It tends to be more in the United States and Australia. The old version was available as a license, so you had to buy a license per year that was limited to 1 device. So if you had it in a department, there was only 1 device in that department, and it would have to sit on that machine, which had all sorts of problems for being able to use it and access it and things. So, but for those who do have a license, you continue to use it until your license expires. There was also an iPad version, an app on an iPad, which was a perpetual license, and I think it's about $500 to purchase. Updates for that will no longer be supported after December 2021. And also, I should say, on the app and the desktop version, they haven't got the new updated norm groups. They've got those wider age groups, so you lack that sensitivity around items, around T-scores and percentiles for the younger age groups. The desktop version updates will no longer be supported on that, but we're waiting to determine the final date on that. Where it will probably be some point later this year that updates will no longer be supported, but that's to be announced. It's free to set up a QGlobal account. So some people who have had a license have set up a QGlobal account and used both versions, because there's been situations where they've needed the online version and they've used both versions. So, you can continue to do that until your license expires. And in terms of training, there's no training requirements, but we will be looking at setting up some more webinars later in the year that perhaps talk a little bit more about score interpretation and using the reports and report generation and things like that. But all that information is in the manual as well, so you don't need any training to be able to do that. And we have our support network, let's say customer support and QGlobal support, and that's accessed all through QGlobal. So all that is there and available. In terms of contact details, the website is here. If you go to our pearsonclinical.co.uk and search PEDI-CAT, you'll be able to find it, and the contact us details if you have questions. There's a whole section, self-help section, contact us section on the website. And there's my email address, and I'm going to pause for breath and have a look to see if we have any questions. Okay, so if you have any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat, and there's one here, which is the cognition part of social cognition domain related to cognitive ability or social cognition? It's a bit of both, really. So some items are communication based, social cognition based. let me see if I can. I don't even know if I could bring up a sample to show you the way it's set out. So what I can do is, let me open something else on my screen. I'm not sharing it at the moment, but I'm just going to open something to answer this question. Bear with me. It's very boring for people trying to listen to me while I open something. I get that. Here we go. So let me get this. I'm going to have to go right back through, because I know I had it as a note on one of my slides, which I can't share with you on the screen, so you're going back all the way through my slide deck, but I can tell you the areas, and I just can't remember them off the top of my head. Let's do it this way. So here we go. So in social cognition, these are the areas it represents: interaction, communication, everyday cognition, and self-management. I hope that answers that question. There are 60 items in total in social cognition, and they're the areas that it covers. Okay, another one. If the fit score is very wide, should the test be redone? No, not necessarily. I would say if the fit score is wide, then that's actually quite useful information for you. It gives you an understanding that there's probably some variability in this individual's profile, and it's worth looking at the item maps to see where that variability is. And then you can use that to help determine where there might be some needs and support needs and requirements. So I think it's actually quite a useful score. I don't think it should necessarily be redone. It's, yeah, so, and that would be my advice around it. There is a little bit more information in the manual, but I think it actually tells you information. You know, their pattern is quite variable. Another one. How much is QGlobal to access the PEDI-CAT on manual if not set up already? It's free. QGlobal's free. Literally, you can spend £2 on an assessment and you're set up and you can have a go at PEDI-CAT. It's you know, you can just get set up. One of the things I didn't mention on here, which is probably useful in the current scenario, current situation, is PEDI-CAT is very useful for telehealth scenarios because you can assess an individual from a remote setting. And on QGlobal, we've actually set up quite a lot of additional resources which are free to help support the COVID-19 situation that we're all dealing with at the moment. So, you know, I would encourage you to go and have a look at QGlobal and set up with an account and look at those resources, because there's lots of other assessments available that way that will certainly help you in the current climate. Yep, so another one, I was aware of PEDI-CAT through a research project, but as an independent OT, I couldn't afford a license, so please, this is on QGlobal now and we can buy per report. Thanks for that feedback. Yep, I think that's one of the barriers that people have had previously, is that they had to have a license, for a year, and if they're only using it a few times, it wasn't worthwhile. And again, you had to sit with somebody on your particular device to be able to administer it. So now you've got all that flexibility around it. So yeah, I think it's a really nice benefit. Another question: how are the 300 questions selected from the item bank? Can you give me more information? For example, scores that are less than 5, or are they in percentile bands? Now, this is quite hard for me to explain because it's based on IRT. So what it does, when they develop an assessment through IRT, they look at difficulty levels, and this is explained in the manual. And there's difficulty levels around IRT. So all the items are then laid out according to difficulty level. So if you have an item that's, let's say you've got a scale of, I don't know, 1 to 10, and an item is deemed a difficulty level of 5, then the next time you might get an item that's deemed a difficulty level of 4, and if that's, you know, if 5 was too hard, you might get one that's 4, and then if 4 is too easy, you might get one of 5 again. So it's a bit, that's the easiest way I can explain it. The best way is if you get a QGlobal account, you can go in and have a look at the manual, and it gives you a better explanation of how that's developed using IRT. There's actually quite a lot of peer-reviewed publications around how they developed the PEDI-CAT using IRT and how they selected those items. So certainly, that research is actually summarised in the manual as well, but that research is a good piece to look out for. But I'm not a psychometrician, so that's the easiest way I can explain it without having the manual in front of me and having slides to support what I'm trying to say. Another one, are there any predicted or observed scores that have been calculated for other assessments like the WISC-5 or the WIPC? It has been validated against the Vineland and against the old PEDI as well. So there's some studies that look at it alongside the Vineland, but not that I'm aware of with the WISC or the WIPC. There may well be some studies out there. As I said, there's tons of research out there, but they're the ones. The Vineland is the one that it tends to be most closely associated with. I think that's all the questions. I'll give it another 30 seconds to see if there's any more, but I think we've done pretty well on time. We'd scheduled an hour, so we've done 56 minutes. That's pretty good. Okay, no, I don't think we've got any other questions. So I'd just like to say thank you ever so much for everyone's attention today, and for all the good questions as well. As I said, this will be available on our website as a recording. So if you've got colleagues who want to access it, then please encourage them to visit the website, and a PDF of the slide deck will be available on there as well. So you have my contact details, which are on the last slide, but oh, I'm not sharing that slide anymore, but you had them anyway. But if you have any questions, then don't hesitate. And thank you for your time today, and I appreciate it. Oh, nice comment. Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you for that feedback. And yes, take care, everybody, and all have a good day.